My name is Melissa Madelon, and I am an undergraduate student at Wharton studying statistics, information systems, and consumer psychology. My involvements here and as a board member on groups including the Wharton Undergraduate Data Analytics Club and Wharton Analytics Fellows have led me to work in business intelligence at CBS Interactive, which if you're not familiar with it, that's the digital branch of CBS Corporation. And I was there last year, and over the course of this summer, I'm going to be interning at Facebook in Consumer Insights under their Global Marketing Solutions organization. So I'm incredibly excited to be here today joining the Wharton Customer Analytics Initiative in discussing some of the most cutting-edge analytical tools being deployed across industries. And particularly to be introducing Salman Mukhtar and Arun Shastri, who are here today to speak about their instrumental work on advancing the processes for inside sales at Microsoft. After acting as the head of product for Amazon Retail Analytics, Salman is now a director at Microsoft responsible for the enablement of artificial intelligence within the inside sales organization, which covers over 1,500 sellers at the company worldwide. Arun is an expert in analytics organization design and data science, leading the analytics practice at ZS Associates, where he aids clients across market sectors in leveraging their use of data and analytics for enhancing commercial effectiveness. So in preparation for this talk, I had the opportunity to speak with Salman and Arun about how they came to work together on digitally transforming Microsoft's inside sales platform. They described their partnership and many others existing in their firms as starting at the grassroots level, where the idea sort of stemmed out of a need to introduce technological innovation cohesively to 7 distinct divisions at Microsoft. And Salman individually sought out Arun to tackle this problem. And I think this bottom-up nature of partnership for building on analytical practices really rings true for any organization you may be a part of today. And Microsoft's manner of implementing AI into their sales platform is becoming really relevant on a majorly wide scale. So with that said, please join me in welcoming Salman and Arun.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Arun. This is Salman, just so that we can introduce. I think if you look at the state of AI today, one could argue that it's fairly narrow and still fairly specialized, but I think it can be really very powerful. And in order for an organization to extract the power from AI in its entirety, probably a couple of things need to happen. First, the data and the science or the logic and the experience needs to be thought in a comprehensive way. So all three have to come together. It's not just about building fancy models, but it's about making sure you have the right data and the right level of data to build these models, and then making sure that these models are experienced by human beings in appropriate ways. You know, in machine-to-machine environments, it's easier. Machines don't ask questions back. In machine-to-man environments, inside sales reps certainly will say, why are you making a certain type of recommendation? So a lot of thought needs to go into how you design that experience. And I think what we are here to share with you today tries to bring together, I think it's a good example of how all three have been brought together thoughtfully in order to drive success. It's also not very common to see a lot of B2B examples come to light. And so I think that's another reason why I think this is perhaps might be interesting for you as an audience member. I think what we'll do is we'll set up, we'll give you a sense of what the problem statement is that we were setting out to solve, number one. Number two, give you a sense for what some guiding principles were. Number three, think about what exactly the output looked like. And then last but not least, we'll leave you with a few considerations, things that we learned in our journey and along the way.
Thank you, Arun. First off, I want to thank Wharton for having us here, and for all of you for being here as well. So just to tee it up and give you some context of the business, you know, if you think of Microsoft, historically, we've had a very high-touch sales model. And rightfully so. We have complex technical projects, some that can be implemented in a few months, some which are larger, long-tail implementations, a diverse set of customers, and things like that. And it made sense to go to market with a very specialized and a high-touch sales force. Well, over the last few years, we've noticed a lot of changing trends. There's data from Forrester, from Gartner, from ZS Associates. And more often than not, customers have told us that they prefer to self-educate. Almost on a 3-to-1 basis, customers are saying even if they're purchasing Dynamics or Azure or Power BI, they can do that research themselves. It's fairly easy to get a sense of a comparison between AWS Lambda and Microsoft Serverless Computing. That information is readily available. Another data point that we've seen is that customers in the buying journey have almost made a decision 60% of the time. They have a very strong opinion before they engage with the sales rep. So this fundamentally puts into play as to what the role of a salesperson is and how that changes. So with that in mind, about 18 months ago, we set out to build a global sales organization, a digital sales organization. And we've set up centers around the world in Dallas and Fargo, Dublin, Costa Rica, out in Asia and things like that. And just to give you a sense of the problem, for the next few minutes, just think of yourselves as a Microsoft account executive. Put yourselves in their shoes. For you, it's day one at Microsoft. You've just been hired. Perhaps it's day one in a selling job right out of undergrad. And we come in and we give you 100 accounts, 100 small, medium-sized businesses, and we say, hey, we want you to grow this business as fast as you can. Now, you got to understand Azure. You got to understand all our rich products, right? Where do you start? This is a very difficult task. Well, first thing is you need to understand the customer, right? What have they bought from us in the past? What they might buy next? In the spirit of a business school, perhaps you'd even do a SWOT analysis in this portfolio of accounts and figure out what your plan is. You'll develop a plan, and then you'll start executing to it and prioritize your time. In our world, this is complicated because of the size of the business, the scale of the accounts. 100 accounts, 6 decision makers on each. So just imagine keeping track of 600 people. And the richness of our products. Right? This is a very difficult task, and we're using artificial intelligence to kind of enable our sellers do more and get situated and grow the business. And over the next few slides, we'll give you examples of how that's working. Before we go into it, artificial intelligence is at the core of Microsoft today. And the way we think of it is, or the way our senior leadership, all the way from Satya, has defined it, is the role of AI is to amplify human ingenuity, to help people do more.
All right. And I think that in thinking about design principles to bring this AI to life, there was a few considerations. One, transparency was absolutely critical. Okay? We need to know what goes into the model, what exactly the model is saying, what the shortcomings of the model might be. And as all of you who participate in data analytics know, that there's always this tug of war between interpretability and accuracy. You want more accurate models, you suddenly go to more black box. And in many instances, we had to make the decision to give up a little bit of that accuracy in order to retain some of that interpretability. The second aspect of it is that it's dignified. We don't ever want a salesperson to call a customer and say, hey, my AI system told me to call you. Okay? We don't want to creep out the customers thinking we are tracking their every move, where are they going, which website are they visiting, things along those lines. And dignified from their perspective, but also dignified from an inside salesperson's perspective. We don't want them to think that we are overtaking them and telling them exactly what it is that they need to do and how they need to execute. That was the second principle. The third one is private, GDPR. We brought up GDPR in an earlier conversation. Absolutely critical. We don't want to do anything. This is, as you saw from the map that Salman put up there, this is a worldwide sales organization. So what we develop is being leveraged in China, in Japan, in Costa Rica, in Europe, and so on. We do want to be respectful of GDPR and other characteristics that we put in place. And then last but not least, accountable. Accountable in what sense? Accountable from the data modeler's perspective in terms of what it is that they're delivering, but also accountable from the system as a whole. If we are providing recommendations, we want to make sure there's adoption at the sales rep level and they're doing all the things that they need to. So these were some guiding principles that we leveraged in order to develop what you're going to see.
So let me take you through the app. So the application that we've built, it's called the Daily Recommender. And it's basically a guided selling application that's powered by artificial intelligence. The goal is to provide scientifically generated insights and curated recommendations to help sellers do more. There's really 3 elements to it. One is reasoning, and it's kind of hard to see the screen, but one is reasoning, which is, at Microsoft, we have lots of data data on consumption, data on tickets, data on what they might have purchased in the past, and kind of finding a meaningful insight to guide the next best action. The second piece of that is understanding. And to us, that's important because it's not so much the insight, but it's making it digestible. Too often people will presume that an insight means something to us. Well, we can't presume the same thing of the sales rep. They're going to consume it in 5 seconds and make an action, right? So you got to present it to them in a way that's digestible. And finally, the third item is interacting. Think beyond the insight and the recommendation. If I'm a seller and you tell me to call ZS Associates and sell Azure, perhaps you should tell me why I should do that, what material I should use, how I should structure that conversation, right? It's really taking it to the last mile. And we've kind of centered this application on these 3 dimensions. When you come in, let's say you come in on Monday. Remember, you're Microsoft account executives. You come in on Monday. We want you to focus on this main recommendations window. And over here, you'll see recommendations on renewals, on new business for Azure, for Office 365, and a whole lot more. So we give you the account name. We give you kind of the recommendation, a reason for the recommendation. If we're going to ask you to make a call based on an AI suggestion, I think you have a right to know how that came about in a way that matters to you. We also give you the amount, what we feel that recommendation is worth, and we give you kind of a suggested action by date. Buying cycles differ by industry. Some companies will take much longer to buy, some will take shorter, so you got to factor all that in. Now, a few things. So the recommendations are AI-driven. They are prioritized. And there's really 3 elements to that. One is, what's the value of the recommendation to me? Timing. Buying apex, the buying cycle differs by industry, so timing's been sorted. And finally, it's the value of the customer over the lifetime to Microsoft that's going to that may change how we behave, how much time we spend today versus in the long term. And notice one thing, it's very simple. Nowhere over here on the screen do you see any data point. You don't see any type of formula. You don't see any complicated metric. We've tried to model it based on AI systems of today. When you watch a movie on Netflix, if it's 5 stars, you watch it. If it's 3 stars, you may kind of go back and forth, right? So we've tried to design a system that comes to life of the seller as they operate. If you click on more details, there's a more details link. We give you more information. So I clicked on a renewal. I'll tell you when that renewal is due, how much it's worth, who to call, when to call. And we give you some more recommendations because we want you to take a holistic view of this customer and not just focus on the transaction today. So it's integrated, it's contextual, and in context to AI and analytics, it's just enough. It's just enough for you to make a yes/no decision as to whether you're going to act on it or not. It's nothing more. In our life, to develop something at scale, space is limited, right? So we have to be very frugal and judicious about the information we present that we want you to consume and act on. You can act on these recommendations by focusing on these buttons. So you can schedule a recommendation if you like it. You can snooze it if you want to work it later. You can also mark it complete, and you can delete it. And this is important. So we've built a system that takes in real feedback, right? If I delete a recommendation, I can say, hey, it's a good suggestion, but it's in progress already. And that's not necessarily a bad sign. It's a sign that says, hey, the machine and the mind are running in parallel, right? You can delete it because it may really be a bad suggestion, and that's fine too. And each of these is a signal for the machine to learn and improve over time. So over time, as the sellers use the system, it becomes more intelligent, and it customizes the recommendations to their specific territory in question. It's simple, it's advanced, and it's intelligent. And we put these words here by design because if you think of developing an AI system at scale, there's a lot of trade-offs that you have to make, right? How can something simple be advanced? How can something simple be intelligent? And there's a fine balance between those things. And by acting on those recommendations, you can quickly build a task list. And just like that, you've basically prioritized your week or your month. And we ask our sellers, hey, go on the system for 30 minutes every other day and develop a plan to grow your business as fast as possible. I said this before, and I'll say it again. From a design standpoint, it's simple. It integrates into life, and it comes to the seller. So the next few slides, we'll talk about success factors, what worked for us, what did not.
All right. And before we go there, the data models that are feeding this are not necessarily the most complicated as such. Again, I said there was a trade-off between the accuracy and interpretability. I think the first next types of models and even the churn models were random forest and some collaborative filtering models to try to figure out customers who bought this also bought that. So that's the notion of it. And that's and as Salman said, those were all the data elements that came together. And I think Deborah spoke about this. One of the critical aspects that we really required was sponsorship, executive sponsorship, and in this case, I think the head of inside sales, absolutely critical. It was very important to her that the digital sales force be established. She knew what the scope and scale of the problems would be if she didn't have that. Imagine people learning 100 new accounts every year, that kind of thing, and she knew that it's not going to happen. So she drove it downwards, and I think that was absolutely critical. But more than that, I think, or equally important, is the first line manager in a sales force. Because the first line manager, if they don't quite get it, what happens if a salesperson doesn't quite understand something, who does he or she go to? They go to their first line manager. If the first line manager doesn't buy in, and they can't explain it, that's where things collapse. So we had to be sure that the first line managers get it, and so we had to pay special attention to them, try to make sure that we gave them enough training, things along those lines. And then last but not least, I think Salman talked about, it takes a village to try to make something like this come together. So the cross-organizational alignment, so many different divisions within Microsoft work together to try to make this a reality. It's shared services, it's sales, IT, and engineering, it's the business AI group within Microsoft, it's the inside sales, it's learning and development, on and on, user interface. Everyone needs to come together, so everyone needs to have that common vision, and I think that's something that Salman was able to get people focused and rowing in a common direction, and that was absolutely critical.
A few more things that add to what Arun said, and some of these are actually common sense, but in my experience, they're not that common. One is you got to work customer backwards. It goes without saying. At the end of the day, for us, it was absolutely critical to go out to the sales centers out in Dublin and Costa Rica and understand the regional nuances, right? I mean, if you go to Dublin, they speak 60 languages in a sales center. That says something. In European accounts, buying happens out of headquarters, which may be based out in the United States or somewhere else. All those pain points, you have to be very intimate and work backwards from there. Develop that roadmap, balance it with what corporate wants, and you'll find a happy medium. The second thing I'd say in context to artificial intelligence is it may make sense to start small. I'm very privileged I work at Microsoft, and we have the luxury of a large organization. But even in our world, budgets are limited, there's competing priorities, and we have to make some tough decisions. It would be very hard for me to go and pitch a 2-year project and ask for a lot of money. So what would work very well is we started very small. We took a very focused use case, and we did it really well. We integrated the AI into process, we proved the results, and then almost as a startup going to a VC, we went and asked for incremental funding and incremental resources from other organizations, and we were able to bring some very strategic change. The third thing, and this is somewhat cliche, but you have to fail fast. And this is not easy because there's 2 elements to it. One is the leadership team has to recognize that they will not always hear success stories. If you're always hearing that every data science experiment is doing super, you're either not being very self-critical or something's amiss. And then for people like me who own the process, it's very hard as well. I don't want to go to my boss and say, hey, we tried all this and it's a big mess, right? That's not a very easy message. So you have to have checks and balances along with just the brutal ability to be self-critical to make this happen.
So reward the process. I think the one critical component of fail fast is reward the process. So are we able to identify if the process worked and it's repeatable and deployable and so on? I think AI excellence is absolutely critical as well too. So one of the standards that we set is that unless a model gives us 2x lift over and above what a salesperson is doing today, we're not going to deploy it. There has to be some minimum barrier. Whatever it is for your organization, maybe 3x for yours, whatever it is. You got to set some bar, and then you got to hold people to it. Okay? And some people will say, I'm underrepresented in the broad portfolio of things, but here's my model. Model doesn't give you the same sort of lift. You got to say, well, wait, let's see if we can get the model to be better before we deploy it. And that's absolutely critical, and we have to also continuously monitor. The second is that when you think about deploying these models, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of money is being spent. The metrics have to evolve. So in the beginning, it's about what kind of return on investment am I getting, but that's got to continuously evolve over time. And as the system comes together, you're not individually measuring components. You start thinking about how all of this is coming together and take a P&L sort of an approach to it. That is the second one. And then the third part is that you have to be thinking of an agile development, a continuous development as far as AI is concerned. Okay? It is absolutely critical to say, here's the list of features, here's the experience that we've released today, here's how people are deploying it, what am I hearing back from the sales centers? What's next? Is there model changes? Is there experience changes? Are there new features that I need to develop? What do I need to focus on? Focus on that, and then pivot to that, deliver that in the next 6 to 8 to 12 weeks, and then next, and so on. So you have to have an agile approach to it.
And on the agile piece, I'd say, in addition to agile development, the business has to be agile as well. Your partners from learning and development or design, all your business partners have to be agile. In context of artificial intelligence, and this is more prevalent in tech, the approach is 10-10-10. So 10 hours to define a problem, perhaps 10 days to model it out, and 10 weeks to implement it. And in a large company, that's not necessarily easy. Or it's a very fundamentally different paradigm of operating. A few other things.
So I think everyone, especially senior executives, have an impression of what is AI. And it's often what they see here. They think of people walking into the Amazon store in Seattle, picking up whatever they want from the shelf and walking out. That's AI to some people. To yet others, it's what Netflix does or what Amazon does. I think getting a common understanding of what it is that you're setting out to do is absolutely critical. If you think of AI as having 3 critical components, there's a perception component, there's a cognition component, and there's an action component. If you want machines to behave and act as humans do, those are the 3 things that a machine has to mimic. It has to perceive as humans do, it has to have cognitive abilities as humans do, and at the end of the day, it has to take some action. You have to bring that common language to the organization, because if you don't, then you're setting out to do something and someone's expectations are somewhere else, and that's the first sign of things we're breaking down.
A second thing I'd say on top of that is think of decommissioning. As you think of different use cases, and you're going to enable something with AI, you've got to put something to sleep, whether it's a legacy process, a legacy investment, a legacy tool. And that's not easy. That's how you unlock value. Otherwise, what might happen is you'll introduce the 161st dashboard, right? And you'll grow obese with the processes over time.
And then the third is, it's not just about replacement of things, but it's also, it has to fit easily with the process that they currently have. You might want to change that process in the future, but you've got to figure out what is their current process, what is it that you're deploying, how can they consume the insights that you're generating within their current process. And you can, of course, think about changing the process over time, but in the beginning, I think you got to think about the people, think about the culture, and in the deployment.
And just to give you an example, so we are running a sales force with 100 accounts, and we have all these recommendations and insights. It fundamentally begs the question on how territories are designed. It begs the question in terms of how a territory planning exercise might look in the future. It begs the question on kind of potential and whether we should grow the accounts or grow the category and things like that. All those things have to be rethought as a function of this. The last thing I'd say is, hey, you have to make it a part of your DNA. So it's more than metrics, it's more than analytics, it's more than action. It has to be embedded in all your processes. It has to be continuously measured in the rhythm of the business or weekly business reviews and things like that. And you have to have an AI lens associated to process and strategy as well. So in closing, let me just say this, that at least in our perspective at Microsoft, one of the things that's worked really well, and I think Arun mentioned this, is bringing things together, bringing different perspectives together. in our view, if you want to unlock value of artificial intelligence, it's about the data. And in many organizations, it's broken. Right? It's about the science, and that can be hard to get. It's about IT, which can be very challenging. It's about process, and it's about people. And if you do well on one of these pillars, that may not necessarily mean success. You may do an A- or a B+ and just bring everything together and orchestrate it beautifully. And that will give you a lot more value. And that's kind of what we've done in many aspects.
That's good. I think we wanted to leave you with just the 3 key themes. One is these things have to come together. It's the data, science, logic, as well as the experience. That's absolutely critical, how you deliver it. Second, executive ownership. Third, I think Salman said this, an agile approach. I think start small, build incrementally, especially if you're thinking about broad AI systems. Otherwise, I think you just have too big of a problem and you're not able to deliver on it. I think that's all that we had.
Well, thank you so much. And I
Thank
know
you.
we're exactly on time. So. It's like 25 minutes on the dot.
Let me just say, as Melissa's coming up here, Deborah, I have a 19-year-old, and I did the sprinkling. I wish I'd known about the Wharton. But I did the sprinkling and pushing and shoving, and in the end, he's just finishing his freshman year at Williams, and he's an English major. So I guess we need poets too. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Salman and Arun. I think this was a really great example of turning around a process that's kind of been pretty much the same for quite a long time, and turning it into something that's really able to constantly evolve and provide new insights to sellers beyond what the eye can see. So to start off, we have a question here from the audience, and that has to do with how long has it taken to implement this program at Microsoft fully, and has there been a significant sales lift, and are there any other tangible benefits that have come along with it?
Yeah, so we started about a year ago. We started about a year ago, and in 4 months, we began to pilot it, to test it out in our sales centers. And since then, we've been continuously evolving it and kind of understanding the experience and defining the roadmap and constantly building upon it. So in terms of, and trust me, our data is probably as bad as yours. It's broken. Our IT is probably as complicated as yours. So it can be done pretty fast, right? I think you have to be smart about the use case you pick, the team that you assemble, and how you execute to it. In terms of benefits, we've seen a few. So most of the models that we've implemented, we almost promised our sellers a 2x lift in conversion. So if they're going to pursue a recommendation, talk to a customer, and close the deal, versus the legacy process, there's almost a 2x lift. And over time, we'll kind of measure it. But for us, that's one of the metrics. There's other metrics. Hey, does pipeline velocity change? Did deals move faster? Is the deal size growing? I think those are things that we're still measuring. Mm-hmm. And the one last thing I'd say is the benefits for us, there's some quantifiable benefits. There's also benefits that are intangible. Right? So we've seen examples of our sellers call a customer and have a more intelligent conversation. Too often sellers will call and they'll do the same discovery exercise again and again, right? I think over here, you can build that bridge faster, you can establish credibility faster, it's lower prep time. I think we're seeing all of those things, and we'll measure them over time.
I think one other critical aspect of measurement is what percentage of the inside sales team has adopted, and how regularly or consistently they're using the Daily Recommender. And in order to do that, I think it was not just early experiences, but we actually had to design a bunch of contests and things like that. So one of the contests for the sales center in India had IPL and cricket, and give away 2 tickets to the IPL for the inside sales AE who accomplishes A, B, C, and D. In Japan, it might have to do with baseball, and there's a baseball superstar, so go see that game. In Costa Rica, it was different. So we had to design contests and other incentives to try to make sure that they came, they saw the value, because to some degree, the modeling was the easy part. And in fact, we were able to suppress any recommendation that we didn't think didn't hit that cutoff. So if it was a low propensity to buy or even a medium propensity to buy but didn't have a lot of potential, we could suppress it. You could only show high and some medium propensity, high potential accounts which had a 2x lift. So if they went there, they were going to see the value. So part of it was also getting them to go there. And so measuring who participated, who didn't, sharing that back with the first line manager was a critical part of the exercise.
Great. Yeah, so something that you talked about a lot was the transparency of the whole process. And I think probably anyone who's worked with any predictive algorithms, they can be sometimes what we would call black boxes, where the process of getting to that final result isn't always very clear. But do you feel like the steps you've taken with your sales platform have kind of overcome the black box, and are you able to kind of monitor those changes in like the predictive methods being used as sellers kind of respond to the recommendations they get? And also, do you feel like sellers have fully kind of put trust into the system?
So we've invested a lot of time in building the trust at a personal level, at a training level, and a modeling level. I wouldn't say we are quite there yet. I think we get different reception based on, hey, whether a sales rep is tenured, early adopter, late adopter, and things like that. I think we've done a lot in terms of trying to explain. So I guess let me back up. If you think about it, what we're trying to do is fundamentally change behavior, right? We're going to a seller and saying, hey, disarm yourself of your legacy experience perhaps. And here's a bunch of insights that were generated by some science. And we want you to act on these. And they may, by virtue of the design, be different from what you've historically believed, right? So we have to build the trust. So we've tried to put in a lot of natural language explanations in terms of why the recommendations came about. I think what we're seeing is almost a 62% acceptance of the recommendations. So we truly believe that, hey, we're breaking new ground. I mean, I don't buy 62% of the things that Amazon recommends or watch 62% of the movies on Netflix. So we've done a lot, but there's still work to be done.
Yep. That's good.
Great. So another popular question from the audience here is, what decisions do you feel are not ready for this AI application yet? So I guess you specifically talked about it from a sales perspective, but I think a lot of other people here in different industries might be interested in adopting it. So I guess where do you see the challenges coming in?
So data is a challenge. I think you can't build models unless you have data. Now, having said that, oftentimes people don't realize that Netflix didn't always have that big matrix, right? You think of Netflix recommendation engine as driven by some big matrix that's got how many ever columns for titles and how many ever users as rows. It's simple illustration. It didn't always have some things populated in there. They had to devise a system to gather that data, and they had to figure out how do they extract that data. And then as different people in your household watched it, they started to realize, hey, look, this guy can't be watching Minority Report one day and Disney Pixar the other. It may be a different person. Maybe I need to create a different persona. And so they had to constantly adapt to how they're collecting the data. So that's one. Second is, sometimes data exists that's just dark, that you just don't understand, exists within your organization. You got to go and find and tap it. The third is, there are ways to clean the data. Many models don't need to actually be run on a daily or in many cases, a monthly basis. If you think about churn, how many customers churn? If you run churn models in most industries, those models don't tend to give you drastically different results month over month. They don't give you drastically different. It's not like you made a prediction of 100 customers are going to churn, and it's a brand new 100 customers are going to churn. If they still persisted in your system, chances are your churn model is going to release that, hey, they still. So if you get the data right, it's not that you have to get it right in equilibrium in smoothly following ways. You got to start with use cases. You can't. I think that's the biggest mistake people make. They say, oh, data is not there, and until I get the data right, I can't do any of these things. And that tends to be an obstacle. You got to start with a use case, figure out the data that's relevant for that use case, build the models as appropriate, and then figure out how you're going to propagate it. I think that would be our.
Great. And I think we're running out of time here, but one more question that I think is really interesting. So something interesting I find here is that the AI is primarily interacting with the sales force as opposed to the customer. And I feel like when we think of artificial intelligence, we often think of this like futuristic world where we as the consumers are interacting with AI on an everyday basis. So I was wondering, do you see AI ultimately having an application in direct communication with customers, and specifically within Microsoft's context, do you think customers have a high value for human interaction?
Yes. So I think in the former part of the question, we're doing work in context of artificial intelligence and marketing, and a demand response business in terms of kind of working leads, following up with customers. There's implementations of bot technology, I think, that is prevalent in terms of, hey, answering basic questions. So there is definitely an implementation of artificial intelligence in direct communication with the customer. There's implementation of AI in terms of who do we target a certain campaign to, right? All those things are being done. I think our implementation here was a little different because it's more machine to human, right? Versus machine to machine, where a system is blasting out emails and things like that. And I think to your point, the second one, in terms of the human versus the AI interaction, I think it's a mix of both. The way we look at it is the AI is there to help the human perhaps be more empathetic. And the AI can pick up signals and listen and tell Arun as a sales rep, hey, be more relevant and have that more relevant engagement with his customer, right? So that's kind of the angle that we've been thinking through.
I just leave everyone with one question that Salman and I received a couple of days ago in another forum, which was, how can AI help us all be more human? Okay, so I think that that's something worth pondering, and certainly I think that that's the design principle that we want to use in enabling the inside sales team at Microsoft. It's not about replacing what they do. It's in fact a guidance system that enables them to perform at an even higher level than where they are currently. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Please let's give another round of applause for Salman and Arun.
Thank you.